Hi, everyone, and welcome today. Today I have Barry Selby. Barry is a speaker coach and a best-selling author. He's a passionate champion for the divine feminine, and I'm happy to have you here today, Barry, to talk about the divine feminine and purpose and love and all these good things that go with the Phoenix Rising. So welcome.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here. This is going to be a fun conversation, I trust.
I believe it will be. I'm looking forward to it. So where shall we start?
Oh, you want to ask me, or you want me just to...
It's sort of a rhetorical question. Hey, let's start with this, though. Let's start with just a little bit about your background and where you've gotten to be where you are today, and then we'll jump into some of the other points.
Well, especially since the topic you're talking about is Phoenix Rising. I didn't look at it this way until I heard about your summit, because the titling and going, that may fit my life rather well. Having lived in 4 different countries, and at this point in my 8th or 9th career, let's just say I've crashed and burned and rebuilt more than once. So
it's applicable, no?
It's apropos, definitely. And truth is, what I'm doing now is really my purpose-driven work, and that we'll talk about more as we go forward. But all the other jobs I had before that were things that I, in some ways, tend to be self-effacing, were things I drifted into. They weren't like, oh, I'm going to go do this and be goal set. And it was more about what was there. And it really was a wake-up call for me to realize I was doing that and change course to choose where I was going with intention and heart-based purpose. And that's where I am now.
Well, I think that speaks to a lot of what people are experiencing right now. They're waking up. They've maybe gone through certain cycles, which the Phoenix process is definitely a cycle. It's a cycle that we go through several times to different degrees in our lives. And that can be in the form of work or relationships or any number of things, but it's mostly about that internal process. And it sounds like that's what you're speaking about. You've gone through some of those processes and come to this point now with your much more attuned to your own purpose.
Yeah. In fact, what you said just triggered something for me, was that I'm really aware that I noticed it with my clients and a lot of people around me, and what I was falling prey to too, as well, is that we tend to abide by the instruction, the images we see, and what's brought to us by the media and by society. So we tend to think we fit in. And so a lot of things that I know I did back then before were governed by what my environment and my peers were doing. I would stick to what they were doing versus going out on my own or following my own guidance. And I think what a lot of us need now more than ever is to really check inside and be guided from this versus guided from what's out there. Because that's what I was doing unconsciously. And waking up is not the most pleasant process. But being on this side of it, I'm very grateful for it.
Right. And exactly what you just said. And I think that this waking up process, more and more people are coming to this point consciously. And it's even happening quicker and in a lot of ways more intensely, because there's just more to wake up to and more challenges, more discovery, a lot more pieces involved. Whereas before, it just felt like sort of this going along, adapting to society without maybe even realizing it, and just doing what was set out there for you. But that's no longer working. That's the disintegration part of this process that I see, is a lot of these old paradigms, social roles, ideas even about ourselves. That's what's disintegrating and falling away. And so we're coming into a new understanding of ourselves. And yes, you do have to go down quite often, crash and burn. Often that's the dark night of the soul, this intermediate process, right? And then the ascension begins. And there's a lot of variation within all those points, depending on the individual, but that's basically the process of it.
Agreed. There is the way I remember somebody talking about this, I'm racking my brain, I think I remember who it is, but there was a clarification, is that really awakening happens, one through like epiphany, the other one through crisis. So when we do expand or rise up again as the phoenix, sometimes it is a painful birth because it's through crisis, through challenge, through trauma, through pain, through suffering, whatever it is. And sometimes for the very few, and it wasn't one of mine, it's through elevation of just understanding and recognizing a different way of being. And some people are getting that gift too. And either way works, just preferable obviously for the pleasant journey versus the painful one. At the same time, it is becoming, as you said, it's almost cultural that we're shifting, because we're watching the society around us almost come into stark contrast that we now see clearly doesn't match what we want. And so there's a spark inside, or a question inside of, if that's not what I want, what do I want?
Exactly.
That for me is what is really driving the question for many of us. So this is very apropos we're talking about this now.
Exactly, it is. I relate very much to what you're saying. And in that process, you can have, I think, a mixture of things too. And this can change in terms of the crash and burn or the epiphany. I think that the epiphany, it can be a mix sometimes. Quite often in the beginning, it's this crash and burn because so much has to be so sometimes violently shaken up within our lives to where it feels like total chaos and disarray. And, a lot of questioning goes with that. I find in my own process that, that doesn't necessarily stop, but we do have better tools and a greater awareness to deal with it within. And those epiphanies can come intermittently to the other parts of it as well, because those beautiful ahas or those understandings or that self-realization or the connection of love and all of that, those are the parts that, for me anyway, have been those little light points that are like, yes, that's what this is about. That's where I'm headed towards, more of that.
Right. But, and also I think one of the blessings in a way is that, like you and I are both discovering, there are more and more people who are waking up. So we're not out in the wilderness on our own doing this as much. Some people choose to do that, and some people don't recognize that those around us are awake. At the same time, if you look a little bit further, you might see somebody in the same process, or someone's been down that road already, so they can assist you. So there's a sense of community that's growing in this awakened, aware, Phoenix arising place that was a very thin area. I can say this. There weren't many people doing it before. This has become much more common, so there's more people going, oh, you're awake now. Oh, you're awake. It's almost this recognition within each other, which is wonderful.
Absolutely. Yes, that is true. And the internet is helping with this, obviously. I've seen more and more groups. It's a way to all over the world globally connect. And there is this quickening. There's this ascension happening. And I think about 7 years ago went into a dark night of the soul, and maybe just in this last year really have started to come out of a very internal, more isolated process. And during that, though, I was able to connect on the internet, see that other people were going through the same things, find out information, and that helped me tremendously. Now I actually feel like I'm stepping out into the world, hence this summit, and hence my desire to help other people who are going through this process. So it's really shifted quite a lot, and I feel it's full speed on now with, how can we use our voice? How can we help others? How can we connect? What does this look like? It's happening. It's almost so fast. It's like, it's an afterthought about how it can happen. Although I want to bring that into focus, but the momentum is just so strong right now.
And a lot for all of us, what the recognition is, or the question for us is, how can I serve?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, the service, the community, the connection, the communication. These are all things that pop up in my mind when we're talking about it. And they all go hand in hand with this, just the process of it all coming together.
Yeah, I'm grateful that I have been in physically, not just online, but physical awakened communities more and more. And it is interesting to recognize that when I leave those spaces to go online somewhere else or go into the world, there's a definite difference. And sometimes I haven't looked at it so clearly, but recognizing that certain friends of mine I've known for a while who are choosing to see things very differently from me, that I'm just disengaging from, because where they're playing, where they're invested, where they're living isn't where I want to live. So there is a choice about this, about who we tend to spend time with.
Absolutely. That is a major point in all of this too, because in the leaving behind of it all, oftentimes that means people, relationships, whether it's a romantic relationship, friendship, family, although you don't necessarily physically leave family behind as much necessarily, but it's still, there's a distance created. You are on your own path.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, having moved, as I said, I lived in 4 countries, moving eventually to the United States, that's 7,000 miles away from my family. And I wouldn't say that was an intentional, conscious choice, but it was something I was doing on a journey that I didn't know I was on, a spiritual journey, an awakening, a path that I was choosing without having any clue I was doing that. I just came out for a job.
So you thought.
Exactly. But what unfolded was finding different seminars, teachings, teachers and mentors that led me down a path I never would have discovered if I hadn't moved here to the United States. So I know that sometimes for those of us who are waking up, sometimes we're being guided by something greater inside of us that is much more awake than we are at the time. But it's almost, it could be even our future selves coming back and saying, come over this way, I'll lead you to where I am. Mm-hmm. That gets very esoteric when we start talking that way.
No, I'm okay with talking very esoteric, because that's part of what's coming up too, is that esoteric nature, going beyond our five senses. That's a very old paradigm, that we are five sensory beings, that we are just these human beings in these bodies. It's so much more than that. Right. In terms of our consciousness awakening, particularly our intuition and learning to follow this, right? And that's what you were doing, even if it was a little bit nebulous or just not as clear in the process. And I can look back on my own life and see that too as well. I would get nudges, or this just looked good, so I'll go do that. But that was always my guidance behind those choices.
And the thing is, I want to make one thing very clear right now, because this is one thing that's a misconception in society, is that intuition, they say it's a woman's intuition. It's not. It's just that the feminine, women in the feminine have natural access to their more emotional skills and intuitions in that same family. We men in the masculine body, in the physical bodies, who are more masculine, have as much access to intuition, but we weren't trained in it. And for me, as I spent a lot of time in the spiritual path, which is a feminine energetic, and in softer learnings, my intuition became developed as a side effect of that. And as much as I'm now, after the last 10 years of study, really owning my masculine place in the world, which is why I do the work I do, my intuition stayed with me. And it is one of my favorite and probably the most reliant skills I have working with my clients, I work with a lot of women, that I sense things that I could not get from just looking at them or hearing them or anything else. And in a way, intuition is really an extension of our feeling. So it does come out of sort of, it's like our 5.5 senses in a way. Sixth sense is kind of, like having telepathy or something, or having sixth sense that way. But truth is, intuition should be looked at as being one of our major 5.5 senses, because it really is tied to our feeling. We can sense things from our level of feeling when we trust it. But sometimes we're so trained to believe what we see physically, and that's it. And if we don't see it, we don't believe it.
Right.
Well, what if it was the other way around? In fact, one of my teachers talks about this. What if you won't see it until you believe it? Mm. What if your way of seeing the world is based upon what you believe, not the other way around? Then what?
I'm really glad you said that, because that is such a part of what's happening now in terms of being our own creators, that we are the creator, and we are creating our reality around us, whether we know it or not, and whatever direction that goes in or not. We have direct access to that and direct influence to it. And even in the last 5 or 6 months, I've noticed that picking up, that theme is being talked about a lot more. And I'm noticing it in my own life. What I think, what I feel, it comes back quicker and more obviously to me. And I've heard a lot of other people speaking about this too. And this skill, or this, I think it's a naturally born skill within us. And we're just rediscovering this.
Right. Yeah, it's what is actually innate in us. Mm-hmm. And we've basically sidelined it because we got so reliant upon smartphones and technology and what we were told. And I believe, well, I want your conspiracy theories on this, but I do recognize that we're waking up more and more. And so things that were happening in the media and in the news and in the world, some of us had senses of that way years ago. They're now being confirmed. Mm-hmm. So the question then is, so was that a fluke? Or was that intuition just telling us and we never listened to it? So the lesson then becomes, if you didn't listen to it then, listen to it now.
Start paying attention and play with it. It can be playful and fun as well. It's the nature of it, I believe, is that curiosity, that discovery, the playfulness. And in fact, when we're in that space, we have much more access to that part of who we are and how we create from that zone or that area of who we are.
Yeah. And for me also, that's the thing is that, again, going back to some of the teachers, I've studied with many teachers over the years, thankfully, and it really imprinted a lot of things in me. One of my teachers said that intuition is something where we tend to think that if it's not right the first time, we never believe it. And so the recognition or the learning to work with intuition, because if I can teach anybody anything about intuition, it's always running.
Yes.
However, we do not necessarily listen or get the messages clearly from it. So when we don't get the message we want, or the one we think is right, we judge ourselves as not being intuitive. And that's a mistaken approach. So the recognition is that intuition happens all the time. So if you don't hear it right, or don't see it right, don't experience it the way you think you should or the way it should be willing to adjust and be willing to be encouraging to yourself versus judging like, I can't do it. Because that's going to create the reality that you won't be able to do it. Because again, what we believe is what we see. Mm-hmm. So if we think to ourselves, well, I can't do this, the result will be, you can't do it. So again, the other way is, if you say to yourself, I can do this, as time goes by, you will notice you will be doing it. So focus that direction.
Yes, very well said. And also, as you were speaking, I'm equating this to actually learning a verbal language, mm-hmm. because it's something that it takes time, it takes attention, and the more practice, the more perfect.
Yes.
And if you don't use it, it will recede. And that's how I believe we all came in very intuitively, right?
Yes,
and
agreed.
That was our first language as babies before we become, we have verbal abilities, we sense things. That is our first and foremost language. That's how we navigate the world around us. That's number one. And then that is, we learn to be more in the mind and all these other things. And I think now that's coming back to be our very important language of self and how we navigate our lives.
Absolutely. And when you said about babies, what I remembered is so many women I've talked to who are mothers remember that early time when the baby was inside them still, and when the baby was born, their level of intuition just seemed to become much more evident and more magnified. Well, the recognition is that was just anytime you can do that. And again, men can do it too. So I'm not just saying for women only, but so many women had intuitive hits about their baby when it was the first 2 or 3 months, or when the baby was still in their womb, how there were senses they had about their baby that's no way they could know consciously. It's like, how do you know that? That's the intuition. So it's innate in all of us. And ladies who've had babies, I think, can relate to this. Again, I'm not one, so I can't say I did it myself. Mm-hmm. But I know so many of my friends who've had babies have that recognition that they do have the intuition. And it's relevant, especially things that are important to them. And that's the other part of intuition. It's usually not something that we don't care about. It's kind of like, you can't be upset with things you don't care about because you don't have any attachment.
Right.
Well, intuition is also tied to things we care about. If we cared about the environment, we'd have intuition about that. If we care about our relationship, we'd have intuition about that. If we care about our own health, we'll have intuition about that as well. So it's really tied to our caring, I believe.
Yes, things that are important to us. That's a great way for those people maybe to, I'm always thinking of sort of practical tips and ways that we can bring into the more esoteric concepts that we're experiencing. And that's a great one that you just said, because paying attention to the reaction of your body, where it is in your body, the tonality, the quality of the message, and is it important to us? Quite often, that'll be something we notice right off the bat, right? Like anything that's important to us becomes a priority. So noticing that with our intuition in that framework, is it important, is really a great way to kind of go forward in noticing these things.
Yes.
And I want to say something for the men out there, especially. And I like the fact that you brought up that woman's intuition. That is a very common term, and I know why for myself. As women, we've always been encouraged to connect, to communicate. It's about relationships. It's about sitting around the campfire as a Neanderthal. We were women in a circle with the babies, with the food. Like, we had that little community, and we depended on signals from the other women and what was happening. Like, that was how, from way back when, that's the women's intuition. Whereas the guys are out, hunting the saber-toothed tiger, the woolly mammoth, and they didn't need it so much. It was more of a pointed focus, a goal. So that's where their intention was. Ours was in this circle in communication. And ever since then, and in society today, it's changing, I think, thankfully, that little boys are encouraged to feel. and to be in touch with themselves better. And so I think this is changing, but this is why that guys have been in a lot of ways shut down from their intuition. And all that to say, you have as much as we do. It's a matter of how we've been more, programmed with it.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that, and I'll take that on personally. But I want to speak to one thing as well that hit me when you said about the idea of back in the way old days of the Neanderthal or just the early settlers, where the women would sit in a circle and be connected, which is great, but men would be out in hunting and doing stuff and saying that wasn't intuitive. I would say, actually, I would counter that, because I believe that we men, as the hunters back then, had to be very intuitive to be aware of predators and to be aware of our prey. So it wasn't so much we were blindly stumbling through the undergrowth looking for dinner. We were out was sensing the environment, feeling out like, well, where should I go? And being guided by a level of intuition when we go, okay, I need to go over this way. I can feel being pulled over that way because that's where where dinner's going to be, in a sense. So I would say that men have intuitive, but it wasn't necessarily described that way. It was men would just have a hunch or a sixth sense. Well, it's the same thing. Right. It's the recognition that we do, in fact, have intuition. It just may not be interpersonal, maybe more environmental. So when I saw that, when you said that, it sort of clarified that distinction, is that maybe there's room for both of us to develop, for women to develop more environmental intuition and men to develop more interpersonal intuition, because that's where we both can grow.
Yes, I really like the distinction, and I'm glad you caught me on that. If I'd gone deeper into it, I think I could have felt into that more, speaking of intuition, but you're right. I mean, the sense of what's important to us. It was important for guys to find the meal.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely correct. I mean, there was a sense going on, especially predators and the environment. You would have had to have been on, like, intuitively to survive all of that stuff.
Well, but I don't think, again, because maybe intuition was looked upon as being a feminine skill or a woman's thing, we men probably won't use that term because that will make us feel effeminate. So maybe it's a whole, misjudging sort of thing. Truth is, we have this hunter's skill. It sounds more manly to say that versus intuition. Maybe it's that simple. It's a labeling issue.
Maybe it's semantics, right? Yeah. Well, no, that's an interesting part of the discussion. I mean, because then you get into language and society and cultural and all of that. And there's, again, a lot of those things I just mentioned are falling away. They're changing. So yes. Intuition, I'm thinking, is becoming more of a bi-gender-based term, which everybody's happy with. I see it going that way, right? It's not feminine.
Yes, the thing is that intuition is something that is, it's a free-for-all. Everyone can have it. It's not based on one gender, but I guess it's the labeling's been an issue, perhaps. And it's semantic. Right. So I agree with you. Yeah, I think it's time that we recognize the intuition as much as, because the other thing is, feeling is a feminine thing too for most of us. We think that when you feel something deeply, women do that, men don't. That's the societal rules. We are evolving beyond that, and I've become very clear about how more men are waking up, thankfully, to having a full-hearted experience, to be emotionally available, even though, and it's one clear piece of the teaching, by the way, is men and women feel differently. We emote differently. Right. So the recognition is that we don't have the same language of understanding emotions. That's the thing. It's different, not wrong. Right. So for us men, being able to emote and be expressive is a healthy thing. It's part of being a real man, I believe.
Absolutely.
Being a masculine man. But it doesn't mean we should act like a woman, because we're differently wired, different functions. So our way of emoting is going to be different, and that's okay. Right. Absolutely. That's absolutely true. And that's a whole other subject we could go down that road with too. I'm tempted, but it's like, yeah, there's the behavior and the gender differences and all of that are very important. And again, I think that falls under the category of just greater clarity, discernment, and awareness about who we are, yes. Right? Whichever sex, and moving forward with that. Right. Recognizing that natural polarity, because the other part is that too, is that masculine and feminine polarity are not tied to gender specifically. Right. Like, not all women are feminine naturally, not all men are naturally masculine. Some men and some women are the other way around naturally, and it's innate. It's not about sexuality either. It's not about someone who identifies as a woman. There are very feminine men who are very much about being with women in their relationships. Right. But the woman's probably been masculine because it's about the energetic polarity of masculine and feminine. This is part of my book. It's one of my work and what I've studied for over 10 years. Is that masculine and feminine polarity is the magnet that creates attraction in relationship. but it doesn't tie that it necessarily it's going to be one or the other partner is going to be one or the other. It's like each partner's going to have one or the other, but it could be the woman being more masculine or the man being more masculine. And it can be situational too, because we have fluidity and we reside generally, just to give you a quick overview, we reside with a majority of one, less of the other. So I generally reside, I'd say roughly 75% masculine, 25% feminine in my normal state. But if I'm in a place where I'm nurturing somebody, a client or a baby, I'll be 100% feminine. If I'm basically driving the car or I'm doing the bills, I'll be 100% masculine. That's the masculine energetic. And when I'm with my partner, to create more sexual attraction and chemistry in the bedroom, it's in me to do my best to be more of a masculine while she's more in a feminine, because we're innately that more genetically. But if I'm only at 75%, that's almost like 75% attraction. If I can be 100% masculine, it's 100% attraction. So literally, it's the more I can be in my opposite, that creates like magnetic pull, like north and south poles, it becomes more magnetic with my partner. And so it's a powerful piece of chemistry that we can actually invoke. It's not something that comes and goes unless we're unaware of it. So that was a whole, I know, sidetrack on the conversation, but I wanted to make sure that was in the piece because some people don't know that they have access to it.
I'm really glad you said that, actually, that those discernments are very important, because that's kind of it's more the depth and understanding that we're heading towards, is understanding these nuances, right? And that we are flexible, fluid human beings, and that we can shift and shape depending on the circumstance in our relationship to whatever and whoever it is. Yes. I mean, to me, this is, I don't know how to put it exactly. It's not exactly beyond five senses, but it is an expansion into more senses, into understanding who we are and growing more into this fullness of ourself, really.
Maybe more wholeness is a way of putting it too.
Yes, wholeness. That's another way you could say it.
Yeah. Wait, what's the senses?
Right. I mean, who knows, 23 times 100 senses. We'll find out one of these days. All I know is we're definitely expanding and exploring and going forward with it. And I want to ask you about this. So I know you work a lot with couples, relationships, romance, man, woman in your work. There's a couple of questions, but the first one is, how do you see this playing out with relationships, whether they're romantic or maybe it could just be friends or family, but how do you see these qualities of masculine, feminine showing up?
This I reflect back on some teaching from one of my first teachers in this arena, coming out of Vancouver. One of the things they talked about, which I really sort of owned, and then I realized there's another piece coming, is that we've gone through an evolution over the last maybe 70 years, give or take, because back in the 50s or so, in the 40s and 50s, after the Second World War and culturally in our world, men and women were basically in a place where men were the breadwinners, women stayed at home because women weren't really owning their space at this point. And there's a very codependent function. Way back in the 60s, there was a black and white TV show called All in the Family. And it was Archie Bunker and Edith Bunker at home. And he was the macho, my way to highway, I'm taking charge, I'm bringing on the bacon, women you stay home and cook and stuff. That was the model that a lot of people raised. My parents were kind of like that to a degree. And so that generation was doing that. And that was kind of the first stage of evolution of consciousness in relationship and in the masculine and feminine piece. And I talk about that being the undeveloped masculine, undeveloped feminine. Mm-hmm. In the 60s was the sexual revolution. And as the feminist movement came out and women started learning to take up their own space and suddenly go, wow, I have freedom, I have power. And at that same time, men were basically, a lot of them were dropping out of society. They were dropping out by smoking weed and doing other things that really put them in their feminine. They grew their hair long. Men had bell-bottom pants on. They wore flowery shirts. They were in their softness. Women were putting business suits and burning their bras and cutting their hair short, going to work. This was an interesting coincidence of timing. I mean, there was a range. It wasn't exactly that, but it was that. These were happening at the same time. But what happened is that women started to get their own apartments, own bank accounts, drive their own cars. They started owning up their space. And so they didn't need a man for home, because back in the 50s, a lot of women would basically be courted by a man whilst they still lived at home with their parents. And they would get married from home into a new home. They never lived on their own.
Wow, yeah.
That's back in the 50s. That's the way it was back then. In the 40s and before that too. And again, these are generalities, by the way, because there are certain exceptions, of course, but these are general principles. So in the 60s, women started to, especially in the 70s, it happened more in the early 80s, women started taking up their own space. But relationships weren't the same thing anymore, because it wasn't about men coming to save women or take care of them, it was women and men were at equal terms. So it's kind of this independent level, because really the first generation was codependent. The second generation is really this independent stage where women were like, I don't need you, prove yourself to me. So men would almost be a negotiation. When they're dating, it'd be like, well, your place or mine, or our drive, or this sort of thing. Because women suddenly had access to money, they were doing their own thing, so it became independent. And that was not necessarily as exciting sexually, but it gave an interesting up-leveling of where we were going. That's stage 2. Stage 3, which we started hitting in the late 90s, and we're starting to do now more and more for the evolved people, just to put it that way. It doesn't sound very polite, but it's what I'm calling the developed masculine, developed feminine, which is men are starting to discover their spirit, their real drive, which is not so much the macho way of the old days, but a masculine way of living that is doing things in the world that are bigger than who we are. So what my work is, my purpose, what I'm driven to do is bigger than who I am, and that's the legacy I leave, and that's the masculine drive to do that. The feminine development, coming from the independence, women start to discover that they've been, and this is what a lot of my clients are going through, strong, successful business women who are basically more macho than the guys were, because they copied what men were doing. They learned how to do things the male way versus their own way. And suddenly women are starting to learn, must be a better way. A lot of women are learning now and owning and discovering their feminine strength, which is, to be honest, way more powerful than masculine strength in women. It's a huge thing that women have been lied to, so I'm just speaking out the truth. So the third stage of evolution is women are talking about, or I should say, owning their goddess movement. The goddess movement started happening really about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and it's really this level of women discovering sisterhood and connection and intimacy with the world and in life itself, and a lot of softness. But there's a mistake in that part I'll get to in a moment, so I'll come back to that. So now women are in the goddess movement. Men are now the warrior, getting things done, making a difference in the world. And this is where the polarity of attraction really works, because masculine and feminine is really birthed in this place. And this is where the strength of that connection becomes the chemistry of love, but also the dynamism of a healthy relationship. But this is what I'm calling interdependent, because we're no longer independent, because we are able to handle ourselves, but we love the addition of the other. So relationships are no longer 50-50, they're 100-100. So we're adding from our overflow and abundance, which is really what a relationship deserves to be. So that's where I think we're heading as a society. Now, one piece I want to bring back in is the feminine. A lot of women discovered the goddess movement and stopped there. And I would like to say, and yes, as a man, I'm being risky saying this, is a lot of women in the goddess movement are stopping on the journey, but the destination is further ahead. And what I mean is that women owning their feminine power, they're owning the feminine softness from the goddess movement, but they're not wielding the feminine power yet until, and as one of my friends termed this, she thinks that the next step after the goddess is the high priestess. Now, that sounds very esoteric, and I look at it from the point of view as being a feminine warrior in a way, because feminine leadership is not macho, it's not soft, it's extremely fierce and strong, but it's from a place of deep love and heart for the world. Same as a man's masculine purpose is heart-driven, it's about doing something legacy that's making a difference that's positive. The feminine strength comes from her heart, like feeding the sword she carries to basically slay the weakness and aspire the strong. It's a place that is such a gift that we need from the women. This is my beseeching message to the ladies out there watching this, is that you ladies have incredible power that you've not been shown it's there because the world doesn't let you do it. The world has been trained on the male patriarchal society to suppress women. There's stories about, there's pieces of the Bible that were cut out because there was the goddess movement in the Bible, but nobody talks about it.
Yes.
And that's another conversation we can go into, but I'm going to stay at this point just for now.
Okay.
So we only have time, not 4 hours. The goddess stage moves into the feminine warrior, the queen, as it were, the woman who basically leads from a place of benevolence but strength. That is totally in the feminine heart. And when women live from that place, for one, it wakes men up big time, because men are going, that's what she's like. Oh my God. And when I see it, it really moves me, because I see women in that space. I'm so in awe, in humility, and in love with that strength they bring. But it's not from a place of like, I can't do it. It's that is the woman I want to stand next to me. And that's the key about healthy relationships in the third generation and beyond, is women and men stand side by side as equal partners, but different partners. So that's where we're going, I think.
And for the last few minutes, as you've been speaking about that, I've been getting constant chills through my body, because this is a recognition of truth and a recognition of the quality and the essence of what you're speaking of, because something inside of me wakes up and hears that. And I'm responding to that because I know that. I know it, right? And I'm still growing into it myself, but I know enough of it to know it. And I know other women, friends of mine and other people that I know, women that I know, they're coming into it too. So I can concur with what you just said about how that portion of it is happening right now. And it's a fierce, yes, well, likewise for men like you who are doing this and talking about it. And, it's one thing for us women to speak about it, but we need men like you to also speak about it, because men will resonate with you in a different way than hearing that from you. And that, in a way, I think probably, I can't speak for them exactly, but it would seem to me it gives them permission in a way to understand and to open up to these things, to be more of that, and be receptive to this part of a woman's growth.
The thing is, yes, first of all, thank you for receiving me. I appreciate that deeply. The thing that I'm so aware of when you said that triggered the last piece is, there are many men who will be so encouraged by this and so inspired that they want to help move this thing forward and be a service to their feminine, to women. And there are a minority, I hope it's a minority, of men who are so attached to the ego, which is the old macho way of doing things, that they will be so scared by women doing this that they'll do whatever they can to stop it. And that's happening in society. So ladies, just know that men who don't get this yet, just know that you will win out. Because men are waking up to understand this is what your strength and your natural gifts are, that we need you this way, and that we will step into our masculine as part of that. But some men are afraid of that step because they almost feel they'll lose themselves in that way, which I understand. The recognition, though, is that I know for myself, the work I'm doing, my book being published was a sign of that. When I published my book, it was the kind of point that book will be there when I'm gone. That's like, wow, I leave a message behind that is positive, that is inspirational, that's beyond my own ego, that is not tied to me doing something. And so the more that we as men do things in the world that are delivering results that are beyond our gifts or beyond our limits, that change lives. It could be changing the way the environment is, or changing society, or changing the way kids are raised. It could be anything. But something that we do out in the world that is extending beyond our own self. That's the masculine heart leading. And for many men, we have yet to claim that. And so I'm encouraging men watching this too, to find out what your gifts are. Find out what you can do that fills your heart as fulfillment, but also changes the world in a positive way. It's time.
It's so time. It's so time. Hence this summit, hence with the work you do, hence a gazillion other signs that I see happening right now, speaking to this very message. Yes. And I feel I'm lit up right now. It's just the truth of this is enlivening. And that's the point, right? It's to be alive and to be connected and to be in that flow and to recognize what's in us and what's beyond us and the whole totality of that. It's such a beautiful recognition and place to be. And this is the magic I was speaking of before, when, this path can be arduous or challenging or frightening. Right. Yet this is the beauty and the magic that comes along with it too. And is always, I found, a result of going through those hard times. This is the reward. It's not a reward, not like we typically think of reward, but Right, but you know what I mean? This is what naturally, organically occurs as a result of waking up to more of who we are.
Using Louise's Hay, I think it's Louise Hay said this about do what you love and the money will follow.
I think so, yeah.
An idea, but the truth is that it's serving and being of a greater service to the world that is filling you up and inspiring you is fulfillment itself. Everything else is gravy, in a sense. So there's this generally misunderstood thing that you have to work for the money and get your job and be paid and then crash at the end of the day. That is so old paradigm.
Very much.
That's what we're growing out of and into a new evolution. So the Phoenix Rising principle, as you talked about, is so relevant now because we are realizing that we're rising above where we were before in a more attuned and a more authentic place than we've ever been before. And it's so time for us to have that on the planet.
It is so time. And you've mentioned the planet a couple of times. This is another aspect of this. right? Mother Earth, Gaia, the feminine, the ability to open our hearts to connect with nature, to connect with animals, to connect with the beauty of a sunset. This is our environment. And I think, well, in the old masculine paradigm that wasn't connected into the heart, there's been a lot of destruction. There's been a lot of misuse. There's been so much going on to our planet that is not sustainable for us to even live here anymore if we don't take this step, which we're taking. But just to clarify it, it cannot continue like this. We must get into our heart and our love and our awareness for ourselves and everything, all the living components that are with us, because we're interrelated and we're creating what we're creating by doing this.
I would say, yes, I would agree with that. And what I would accent with that is in the undeveloped masculine, or the macho way of doing things, it's basically the shift I'm getting is that format is what can I get? So it's attack, it's destruction of the environment to get things out of it. It's to make things happen so I get more out of it. The developed masculine is what can I give? So how can I serve that is a way of making it better than it was before? So if I am going to do things to create a new energy resource, it benefits the environment versus taking from the environment. Or if I'm doing something that's going to take care of the children, it won't be oppressive, it will be inspirational, it'll be expansive. It's like the focus becomes how do we expand and grow versus how do we take things away? And that's the evolution that we're all going through as men, from the undeveloped masculine, the macho, to the developed masculine, which is really serving, making a difference. But women are coming to their own because naturally in the feminine strength, there is a givingness. There is a place that is so abundant because the feminine is tapped into Mother Earth, to the life itself, which is hugely abundant. So the feminine energy is one that is so expansive, which is why men are scared of it sometimes, because it is one that is like, the masculine energy is very pointed, the feminine energy is very expansive.
Right.
So when women are in their feminine, a lot of men going, whoa, that's too much. Well, check yourself, men. You should be welcoming it.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, for sure. And I've run across plenty of that, men who are afraid of the feminine power. And along my own journey of developing my feminine power, obviously, I mean, it was part of the grist for the mill in terms of my own development. But I clearly recognize what that looks like. And I'm very clear about why that is even, it's just, yeah, so that's, I don't know where I was going with that in a short moment, because I could really go off into it, but it's, with the time we have left, I'm just aware. I just want to mention that I know what you're talking about personally. And I would just, and at the time it looked like I had to give up a lot, whether it was the relationship or whatever might have come with that, to honor my own path, to step into my more powerful feminine self. And, at different degrees, it was hard and it was painful and all of that, but there is no way I would go back to that, knowing what I know now.
Yes.
No way.
Yeah.
Right.
I have great gratitude for my past relationships, because 3 in a row went through the stuff that kicked me into this journey. So much as I hated what happened and how I didn't do things right myself, I took responsibility because I didn't do things the way I should have done in those relationships. But at the end of 2006, it started a new journey for me. And I've basically been single pretty much for 10 years, almost 11 years. That is absolutely divinely perfect. Even though at times I'm like, I don't want this, I want to be in a relationship, but I knew that I wasn't the right place for one. And I had to really, in a way, give that up so I could follow the truth to know what I am now. And so any relationship that comes forward now is a very different place than it would have been 10 years ago. And that was my choice. Now, you don't have to take 10 years to do it. That was just my choice and my path I went on. But I really got clear for me as, again, masculine heart, my work is more important than anything else. And if I am spending the rest of my life single to do the work I'm doing, so be it, because I get fulfillment from that. And yeah, I'd love to be in a loving relationship, as long as that relationship is complementary to what I'm doing, ideally together or in a way that I can support her and she supports me, so that we can both do what we're doing in the world.
Yes, and I love that you said that piece, because I think that's also a component to where we are now. I relate very, very much to what you said. Nothing is more important to me than evolving my own heart and bringing that out into the world. And I know that for a while now, I've needed to be in that relationship with myself. That's been very clear. That's the most important thing. And when the time is right, that will shift. But I would never sacrifice that or give that up, because I could never not be in that place of expansion. It's just, But, and so with having said that, I think that when we do attract now going forward, a lot of us, it will be in a partnership with that same vision, with that's coming from that same template of understanding within ourselves and what we're here to do, and the greater purpose connected to all of that.
Which is basically meaning that it comes from a fullness, not from a lack.
Exactly. Oh, yes. Very, very succinct way to put it. Yes. Very nice. I like that. Yes. Coming from my fullness, not from my lack. Yeah. Not needing someone to fill something in us, but to share the abundance that we have.
Because the lack is the codependence. That's the first stage, which is basically where I can't live without somebody else. So if they die, I'm dead.
Right. Like most of our songs say, right? Most of the songs on the radio.
That was a chapter in my book too, about how like the last 70 years of love songs have been perpetuating that we don't live well unless somebody else is in our life. And that's a mistaken approach.
Right. Right.
You know, we're not Siamese twins, we're not joining the hip. We have autonomy.
Right. Yes. Well, I like what you said too. It's not 50-50, it's 100-100. And that in itself connotates a great deal of expansion.
Yeah. Taking up your own space, filling out the fullness, and living your own life that doesn't depend upon somebody else showing up.
Right. Yeah. That depending business is so old school by now. You know what I mean? I just had to say that. It's like, even when I said, I heard you say that, it was like, ew, no, that doesn't feel right at all. That dependency. Right. Interdependent, but not dependent.
Yes.
Cool. But we're almost to our end of the time, Barry. Yes, so many things to discuss here, right? Such a rich subject with the heart and love and all that we're talking about. Is any last words you want to say, or, you know, to wrap it up in any way?
Now
that we said all that.
Yeah. I would say one thing comes up straight away, actually, is to say to everybody watching, men and women, we all have purpose. We all have meaning. We all have reason to be here. This is a tribute to a friend of mine who passed away a few days ago. She was an incredible, powerful force for good, a fierce goddess, a tiger for her women. She was amazing, but her demons got her. And I don't know how things ended, but she transitioned a few days ago, and she wasn't that old. But I get clearly is that sometimes we think that we can't because our demons are stronger, or that our hurt is too much. But we all have gifts to give. And if we follow those paths to those gifts, it'll heal our troubles, it'll release our pain, it'll put us in a place where we can thrive. So absolutely find what inspires you and do it. You will change the world, and you will be changed too.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Just as you were, it's like I'm getting choked up as you were talking about that. I could feel into what you were saying. The power of that. So yeah, thank you, Barry. That was a really good way to end this. And I'm sorry to hear about your friend as well. And you made a very, very beautiful point in relation to that. So yeah.
You're welcome.
Well, I think we'll leave it at that then.
Absolutely.
Lots of feeling, a lot of feminine there, right? A lot of emotion, beautiful emotion. Okay. Well, thank you again so much for everyone joining us. And Barry, thank you for your wisdom and taking the time to be with us here today. I really appreciate it. And I've enjoyed our conversation.
My pleasure. I've been totally inspired the whole time, because the questions came at me in a way that was just different from what I would have thought about or planning, and what came up was even better. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I love it when that happens. Great. Okay. Well, thank you again, everyone. I look forward to seeing you again soon in another video, and have a beautiful day. Bye, everyone.